I also advise founders who are looking for a co-founder. And the significant part of that, just like you're dating, and I say, remember dating, it's very similar. The values bit is more important than the glossy exterior. So that is fundamental to the longevity of any relationship. And the co-founder is literally as if you're picking a life partner. So it's exactly the same thing we have to align on.
For those listening or watching, this is Eric Melcher. And if you want to know how some of the most innovative founders or marketers in Europe are scaling their companies, then this is the show for you. Today, I have Beth Nevins on the show. And Beth, for those who don't know you, can you tell us who you are and why should people listen to you?
No worries. First, thanks for having me. So my name is Beth. I have a consultancy in the people and talent space called developer.io. My background is years and years deeply in people and talent. I've worked in several startups myself, reporting to founder CEOs on the leadership team, representing the people and talent strategy. And now I work at a portfolio level for myself across seed to Series C tech startups, mostly directly with the founding team and the co-founder or founders directly.
All right. Now, Beth, let's suppose I'm a founder. I just got some new funding and I need to hire some people, maybe 5 to 10 new people to ensure that I'm hiring the right talent. What do you suggest I do?
Yeah, so you're probably in the pre-seed or the seed stage at this point then with $1 million plus sort of funding, which is the earliest sort of stage I come into. And there's loads of workshops we do to get to this point and dimensions that we look at. So I'll run through some of the obvious ones. But first of all, it's important to know, have we got a solo founder or multiple founders? Because that already affects how we start thinking about the skill set between the team, roles and responsibilities, the background and strengths and so forth. The second thing we want to look at is the actual business model, like what are we actually building? Marketplace and how we go to market with that is very different to, I don't know, a deep tech AI model type company. It's much harder, more niche to get certain talent, more competitive in that space, for example, arguably. And that's different again, perhaps to a pure play SaaS business or product that we're building. So we discuss all that together and what type of skill set we probably need within that. But then in a founding team, generally, of course, at this point, what are we actually trying to achieve in our milestones? It's finding product market fit. So at this point, really, we're looking at people to build that product. The founders are responsible really to sell and get that sort of first million in revenue plus. We may have an SDR or some sort of business development lead gen hire, or it could be growth marketing hacks and so forth if it's more B2C. And then more of the difficult piece is the hiring for attitude and what I call the stage fit piece then, and really the values fit piece, which is the hardest bit to test and train founders for. But really then working with the founders to work out like what matters to them personally, what are their principles, what do they stand for, what's their vision for what this company starts looking like and how people will feel in this and work together. And then we start building sets of questions and an assessment on finding the right attitudes that will work with them. We're spending a lot of time together. It's not just the founders in this type of, marriage together for the next 10 years. The founding team could well be there for many years. So we have to really take that part seriously. So yeah, to summarize, there's the domain fit, there's the stage fit, it's the values fit. And then of course, looking at the unique roles that we probably need that are relevant for the product market fit milestone.
Have you ever worked with a company that had multiple founders and they had different values, Beth?
I advise and coach multiple one-to-one founder CEOs, but some of that advisory session actually do want the two co-founders together in that. And that's interesting dynamic immediately then, because you have an open window to strains between them, tensions that can happen between them. You are a mediator. I'm recently going through this right now with the two co-founders. I think like the values fit can happen. That's obviously why relationships break down and co-founders do part. That definitely does happen. And I've worked with founders who have come to me because a co-founder has left and we're looking at that scenario and moving forward. So of course it happens. I also advise founders who are looking for a co-founder. And the significant part of that, just like you're dating, and I say, remember dating, it's very similar. The values bit is more important than the glossy exterior. So that is fundamental to the longevity of any relationship. And the co-founder is literally as if you're picking a life partner. So it's exactly the same thing we have to align on. So to answer your question, it does happen. It's not the first time I've seen it. It won't be the last. It definitely does happen. But also part of that mediation, working with ISO conflict or tension between co-founders, is bringing them back to the thing that does keep them together, which is, as you said, the values and the mission. And that's important to also remind them of that this is just one roadblock, that we still have to work on those relationships just like we do in our personal lives.
Have you ever had to tell a founder, hey, you've got some work to do on yourself before we go out and find this other co-founder?
Yeah, and it's not just that situation. That's what coaching is actually about. In my opinion, why do founders fail or struggle? To be very honest, there's a few things. First is identifying the self-limiting beliefs that they may have. And that might come out in a few sessions. That's quite easy to tackle, to be honest. But the second one that's the most difficult is the accountability piece. If you see recurring patterns that they just are resistant to being accountable,
Oh,
because in any relationship breakdown or any scenario where things aren't working, it's not just the other person, right? You are the common denominator. That's a hard holding at the mirror piece with a founder, to get them to that place of self-reflection, to take that absolute urgent and extreme accountability. And there's lots of loops and frameworks I talk about with them on falling on the victim side of that loop, or RE, an accountable owner in the other side. And a founder came to me recently, literally last week, was referred to me, and he said to me, I've had a head of position fail twice. I must be doing something wrong. That is a founder I will work till midnight, days on end, to fix that problem with them, because they've already shown me that they are highly accountable. It may well be that the other person is problematic, or there's other reasons. For sure, that's definitely not the only reason that it's all them, but it's a good starting place that the founder recognizes that they must have a role in that breakdown of a problem, or things aren't working out. So yeah, that's also an important part of really holding at that mirror and discussing that theme of accountability often.
yeah. No, I've got some work to do with my son. Grant, he's only 6, but he never wants to take accountability for the things that he's done.
Yeah, that's life. I've been there as well myself, so I have to
Yeah.
remind myself of this very much also.
All right, folks, time for a quick break here. Having worked as a marketer for many, many years, I've come to the conclusion that the right tool can be a game changer. That's why I'm excited to talk to you about Leadfeeder, a tool that helps you cut through the data and turn those website visitors into solid leads. Leadfeeder shows you which companies are checking out your site, tracking their behavior, and integrates all this with your CRM. Result, your secret weapon for targeted lead engagement and making it easier for your team to convert website traffic into sales. Head to leadfeeder.com and get a free trial today. You can also get an extended premium free trial when you let them know you heard about Leadfeeder through the B2B Marketers Can Laugh podcast. Okay, back to the show. I have another question for you, Beth. To keep good alignment and collaboration among teams, let's just say teams that have maybe 10 to 50 employees, what do you suggest? What are some things that they can do?
I think more C-level. So I think in systems and overall infrastructure. I think like the system for alignment starts top down, but you obviously want to bring people on the journey of that setting of the direction. I think that's important for high performance. If the direction's not there, we don't know that travel. What we're working on, what we're not working on is super important, because there's loads of distractions early on. I think the second thing of like alignment is role modeling that collaboration, and role modeling the questions that leaders should be showing to teams, like asking the other leader in the meeting, are we on the same page? Don't leave the one-to-one together without confirming, are we on the same page? Make sure you're checking that constantly. You'll reinforce that alignment then with your systems. It could be OKRs, it could be other sort of KPI trees, depending on your maturity. It could just be targets if you want to be more of a target efficiency, more manufacturing oriented model. So you will have frameworks and things that align the company together in different departments. And then, of course, you're rewarding and reviewing against that. And if you're saying collaboration is a value or something that's important to your business, then you have to incentivize and reward for those right sort of behaviors to embed that and reinforce that whole systems design. So that's the sort of flywheel you're working on for high performance, let alone alignment. But alignment is a big part of that. And making sure it's something that people value as an individual level as well. That's part of the interview process. It's part of asking them, what's your view on what does good alignment look like to you? And I always ask those open-ended questions, because if they can describe what that means to them or looks like to them in practice, rather than asking, do you value alignment, yes or no, which is not really, doesn't tell you much, then that's half the battle. It always comes down to good recruiting against making sure the right people align and are a good match for the environment they're about to go into.
I love that little phrase, are we on the same page? Because just because you speak the same language as the other person doesn't mean that the message came across and is understood and agreed upon. So I'm going to start using that.
I literally had this with a manufacturing leader who said, one of the coaching conversations I had with him was, I've got this team, I tell them what to do in the morning, and then 4 hours later, it doesn't get done, or they haven't done things in the right order. So I said to him, okay, so once you've explained what we're doing for the day or the priorities, have you asked the team to relay back to you what you've just said? No.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you know? What the words we say, I have a fascination with language, and we're not great listeners, including myself.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way we can qualify is to ask someone to paraphrase or recite back what's just been heard, particularly with juniors as you're coaching them and so forth. So they appreciate the skill of listening early on, not patronizing, but just say, just so we're on the same page, what can you just summarize what I've just said so you can tell the team and so forth? Particularly when change management and all this, once you start getting leadership teams in, the big founder transition is the founder has to now communicate to other people. So you can't have this message dilution or message skewing or all the rest of it as things happen. If that part becomes very important, what's said at the top actually is the same on the front line at the bottom. So this becomes a big part. Are we on the same page? Can you recite back or play back to what I've just said? Also checking that whether they agree with that. We can disagree and commit, but actually sometimes message gets skewed because people don't actually agree what's been said. So they put their own spin on how they think it should be executed and done. So there's lots of reasons why things fail. And as I said, check that they feel confident with what they've heard. So it's always that qualifying, are we on the same page, and give that window of opportunity that people can then disagree with it. Because back to your alignment piece, why does communication break down? It's not just they haven't actively listened, it's sometimes they don't really align with it. And that's why sometimes the message can get changed somewhat.
Yeah, I guess there's a reason why the military always has people repeat back whatever the order was or whatever's been asked for.
I've spoken to and coached many a founder that loves books, Turn the Ship Around, and have a fascination with like military operations and Navy SEALs and so forth. There's lots you can take from them as high performing teams, but also there's other ways that startups are very different, I would say, in terms of day-to-day drills.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, another question for you. We talked about 10 to 50, and I know you have some experience with this. Do things change from 50 to 100 employees? Is there another set of procedures that you would focus on or standards?
Yeah, so I've done this several times. This is the phase that many founders have agreed with me on, is strangely the hardest part. This sounds odd, but I find post 100 is much easier. 50 to 100 is the more difficult. And the reason for that is you usually get in even like 25 to 100 as post the Series A raise. And that's the first time that things start going wrong. And I'll tell you for why, on a cultural perspective. Because if you haven't systemized or really understood your hiring science at this point, what happens is you hire a bunch of leaders, and a bunch of leaders then start organically hiring a load of people. And culture then starts becoming a microculture and a wider culture. Microcultures within each unique team and their experience then. And then you've got the wider culture of the whole company. And what happens is if you haven't got hiring right before this point, you've got leaders starting to either not be the same in terms of the sort of values or in terms of like their interpretation. And one bad leader, trust me, in 0 to 100 is very painful.
Yes.
So, and founders don't necessarily want to tell boards early on that this is the first mistake or first thing that happened, particularly if you use exec search, and I've been there, it's hard. So you're stuck with these hires. You shouldn't be, but tends to what's happened. So you've got this massive risk in terms of scaling hiring because you have this big growth spurt that you haven't been prepared for. That brings a lot of pain if you can't get hiring science right before that. The second thing that starts happening then is it's the first time the founder is leading a leadership or a senior leadership team. So that becomes like very important in how successful that is on the 50 to 100 journey when you've got this. And now 50 to 100, communication and codification becomes an actual real thing that becomes really important to hang all of this alignment together, as you quite rightly said. Because this is the first time I find with founders, they are actually having to intentionally think about what I say is their philosophies and they're almost their manifesto. Because the one thing that doesn't work in 50 to 100, where you remember everybody's names, sub 50 people, you can probably have enough time to have just about enough one-to-ones in the month with 50 people and so forth. You don't have that anymore. So you've got to have more structures and systems to make this scale for sort of 50 to 100. But to go back to my point, as I digress slightly, is this codification, this philosophy piece. If you don't do that, the unwritten rules that you've tried and relied on, this oral tradition before a text or codification of philosophies, it can't scale. So as I said, you start having word of mouth, different dilution, different understanding of language, different interpretation, and you start needing guiding lights through values, through philosophies, through written down in your Notion, your central hub to self-serve people. You start needing all of this stuff to scale on that 50 to 100, because it breaks down very quickly if you don't actually have some light touch principles and process. And that's where it gets difficult, where you need that sort of big gap. And in my experience, I would say this is the biggest step change on whether the seed stage talent are actually scalable. Because if they can get through that big step change, they can probably scale a little bit further beyond that as well. But if they can't make the we love each other all in the room and there's no process, we can do what we want. Now we need that first bit of process or systems in. If they don't take to that, then they're probably not going to be very scalable for the rest of the journey that the company is about to go on.
Now that so many people are working remote, how does a leader know whether or not there's an issue with the culture? Because let's say there's a bad leader that they hired and they're delivering on the numbers that they're supposed to, they're meeting expectations, but the people that they're hiring, they've got this own little clique that they formed and they're not really collaborating with other teams and other departments. How does a founder really detect this and find this out on his or her own?
Yeah, very good. Great question. So there's a few things. I won't keep talking at this whole like top line strategy level because there are tactical and more practical things to do. But on a general rule, I'd say remote and trust. I personally don't agree remote is more difficult than office. I don't agree with that. It's just different. Difficulty and complex are not the same thing. And I think that's often misconstrued and conflated in the same conversation. Hybrid, in fact, is the more difficult for inclusion and for various other things, particularly if you haven't got set days in the office where everyone is going in at the same page. That has more complexity because it's a blend of different models and different ways of behavior that's required. So remote is actually just as easy in my view, but different to office working. Although I see value of office in the beginning for sure, separate conversation. With the remote, just like at any scale, I'm a big fan of spot one-to-ones. So I encourage founders, you don't have this scale issue beyond sort of 150, 200 people where you can't do this. But I'm a big fan of spot one-to-ones. And even when we were 100 people plus and our founder would come to one of our factories and so forth, they'd have spot one-to-ones on the shop floor. It's a very quick way to get a temperature check. There was a LinkedIn post I read and I liked the other day. I think it's important that founders are not just speaking to the same people or the same people that naturally have the confidence to gravitate towards a founder. A founder should have a spot one-to-one at all levels, a graduate, an intern, an SLT that they haven't had a one-to-one with for some time maybe, a new starter, that founding team member, that great dev that perhaps now you're managing a leadership team they haven't spoken to. Is it worth having a chat to them now a few weeks later just to check in with that amazing DNA of the company and so forth? So that to me is important, where EAs and chief of staff can be really helpful to schedule those spot one-to-ones throughout the year to keep before that breaks at a certain number for sure. But how do you start doing that? And then the obvious question then is you do lean on then your people team to find a way that surfaces that employee voice and sentiment for the leadership team. That is the point. And a great people team is also doing those spot one-to-ones, is also spending that time. A good people leader is across the business constantly, not in their ivory tower or in isolation. I've done remote. Did remote distributed with multiple teams across the Middle East and North Africa and in the UK. And I spent most of my time talking to people, to be quite frank, on Zoom and on Hangouts. And while that could be some fatigue for me, that's what's necessary. So you have to make that time, you have to make that commitment to speak to people and read those cues. And part of the reason people, I think, engage at surveys or trying to find some data and so forth and raising that up is challenging. Is 9 times out of 10 products fail because we haven't actually identified what problem we're trying to solve. It's not ever the thing in itself or the actual process or whatever. It means we haven't worked out what problem we're trying to solve for, as you said, with remote, and then we haven't built or asked the right questions that measures the very thing we're trying to actually achieve. And you have to ask very different sets of questions, I think, to raise risk and raise feeling and sentiment in a remote setting as you might do perhaps with in-person collaborations. As I said, different, but not more complex.
For founders or CEOs that are running organizations greater than 50 people, do you ever give them any advice on how to create an atmosphere where the one-to-one person that they're talking to, maybe this person is more junior level, can just be relaxed and comfortable and be open to be truthful in their conversations and share that information? Because it can be pretty, maybe even say a little bit scary talking to the CEO. And if you're a junior level person and this organization is 60, 70 people, you've never spoken to the CEO before, right? You've never been asked to. You may think that you're in trouble, but how do you create that atmosphere just for open dialogue?
It's the same perception with the role of what we call HR as well. No, we don't want to get in that situation where someone's got a meeting with the people team and think they're going to get fired. So it's what is your, it's just true, it's true, right? So it's what is your brand perception as a CEO? What do you want to be known for and how do you want to be perceived across all levels in your business? That's the top line question we discuss on their own personal brand. And how does that play out in practice? So again, my role is to help the CEO with this. It should never be that junior joins and it's a year until they've met the CEO. No. In the onboarding, we have a system that there is a meet and greet with the CEO for all new starters together and have that introduction as soon as possible in that scale. So the CEO is already introduced to any level of the company in a little mini all hands or a new starter session. And it's the culture you want to have. So we would call it Ask Me Anything. So the CEO did not speak about their whole life. It was an open floor for everybody to answer questions to that CEO. So they knew what was expected of them. They do the talking and the CEO is in the spotlight then doing all the answering rather than, in that telling. And once you build that dynamic of that servant leadership sort of culture that the CEO is just listening, then it's amazing. Because one thing is quite, the role modeling again is key with coaching is I had a CEO once, bless him, that was saying, we go to an all hands, whatever, and he was just saying, speak up. But people don't speak up because they've just been told. People speak up because they feel and they see around them how people are reacting to other people's voicing of challenges. It's how you behave to reaction that people start noticing, okay, there is psychological safety here. So the role modeling day to day is the big personal branding piece that people will know. And that is the unwritten rule that is allowed, is just your day-to-day behavior, that people will have a sense of who you are. So that's also really important as well. And another example of this is in my last perm job, we had what's called Culture Club. And we would crowdsource, and every month in a lunch break, people can dive in and we would Miro board on suggestions, and 3 employee suggestions would get rated as a group. And the people team would have to execute them before the next sort of culture club. Only 3, because we'd rather make sure it was done than too many that weren't done. The founder would be there as well. The founder did not speak. They just listened. That was their role.
Okay.
And that's my point, is if you let employees talk to you in that space and that dynamic and they get used to that, then you're going to have people much more vocal, much more safer. And that was really interesting because the culture in MENA is very different, and there is a lot more structures and hierarchies and org charts and so forth. It's a very different culture to the West. And we had amazing response from people in the Middle East saying that we were quite different consequently in how we were operating, but it was very different to how we originally were operating as a company there.
Yeah, no, I like that idea, being introduced to the CEO, or just go out of the way to introduce themselves as soon as the person starts. Probably the entire executive team should do that, not just the founder and CEO, in my opinion.
I agree. And even with all hands, one of the things as we started maturing in the business, in both startups I worked with, 50 plus, 100 plus, is the all hands, in my opinion, should not just be senior leadership team every time presented. I think it's important, if you want ownership and true accountability in the company, you push it down. So in the all hands, if people were then publicly talking about the things they built and what they've done and what hadn't worked in the OKRs, they are publicly then owning their work and their delivery and their results. It's not just the leader. Now, don't get me wrong. If things go wrong, the leader does take the accountability. That is your job and responsibility you take on as a leader. But the ownership and building that culture of ownership of the team is pushing that down and pushing teams then to talk about that openly across the business, about what they're doing as a team, rather than seeing the leader represent them all the time publicly across the business. For me, I think it sets the wrong tone, particularly when you're trying to keep as flat as possible for as long as possible in startups.
I saw that you referenced the term people leader in some of your LinkedIn posts. And for the audience, including myself, Beth, like, what position is that? What title is that? Is that like head of HR? Can you just clarify that? And then also, how much does a people leader play in the success of an organization, in your opinion?
That's $1 million question. Yes, depending on the stage, of course, a people leader will be the highest representation for people. I prefer the word people over HR, but in the company. So it could be a head of people, which is often in a sort of sub 100 person. It could be a director or a VP, however your leveling structure works, post 100 people, and certainly post 200, that could well be a chief people officer and so forth. So yeah, the highest representation for people in the business is what I call a people leader. And your second question, how important? So I think it's becoming more and more important. And the reason for that, I say, is we're seeing a huge shift, rightly, where VC-backed businesses in particular have to have more sustainable growth now earlier on in their startup journey, and have looking at margin improvement and profitability as well as just revenue. And what comes with that, I think, and I steal what somebody else has said, but I concur with that, is a question now, is vision just enough now in terms of a leadership capability? I think the operational skill set is becoming more and more important, actually earlier on in startups now, to make sure that we can be, I know no one likes the word, but leaner and high performing, and having a better design is actually becoming more and more important, I think, in early stage startups, to extend that runway and spend better and optimize. So the people leader role, I think, is becoming more important now, because intentional design with this, and someone representing and has that toolkit that could come in and help you design for better fiscal responsibility and optimization and getting the most out of the people that we've got, is hugely valuable. Again, all comes down to the strength of the founder. And I appreciate arguments that they may not want to have that in there if they've got a really strong team. But I do think this role, if I think of what I do day to day, it's such an amazing mediator or a joiner up of the two sides. Because one of the things I find which is really helpful of this position in startups is the employees used to have one-to-ones with them, and you take them on a journey of empathy for a founder, and you spend lots of time with them on them thinking about the founder's situation and what they might be feeling right now and why they need to be doing the things that they're doing and saying the things that they're saying. And you have one-to-ones. And this is where actually the role is not a hero position, but it's a very influential role on the ground, that all this unseen work that people don't see that actually is just as important as good strategy. And then with the founder, you're doing exactly the same thing. You're working with the founder to build those empathy skills on the people, on the employees. And if you build really strong empathy in a business like that, and you've got a role that is focusing on that a lot and building the empathy in the company, is extremely powerful to get good results as far as performance goes. That role in itself, dedicating time to building empathy up in the business, is, for me, it's a big advantage.
Agree. Okay, I've got some rapid fire questions for you, Beth. Are you ready?
Go on, let's go for it.
Give me the first thing that pops in your head. First question. Your favorite job, was it a nanny, milkwoman, or a florist?
It was none of them. My favorite job was a cleaner. I love cleaning.
Okay. Good for you. Good for you. Craziest thing you experience while milking a cow?
I must admit, a milkwoman in the UK doesn't necessarily milk the cow. Luckily, I have milked a cow. I have done that. but not in the capacity of the role of a milkwoman. The milk,
Okay.
luckily, was already boxed and bottled, ready for me to go off and deliver.
Oh, okay. So when I read that, I was like, oh, she's got her hands under the cow and she's milking at 4 a.m.
And luckily for me, even though I've had an eclectic and varied role, that was one skill I hadn't acquired.
Okay, next question. Favorite song you like to sing?
I love all the Amy Winehouse stuff, R.I.P. Yeah, I love all the jazz blues influence in modern day. I love singing Gregory Porter, but I don't have his voice, so I can't sing the guy, but I do try when no one's watching.
Okay, next question. Have you ever given a bad haircut, Beth?
Yes, when I was 5. I cut all my sister's hair off that she was completely bald the day before my auntie's wedding. She had to wear a straw hat.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yes.
Did you get a whooping for that at least or no?
Back in those days, parenting was very different than it was now. I indeed did. Yes. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Oh, I'd still give my son a whooping if he cut his sister's hair off. Trust me.
Yeah. It's pretty tough. But there we go. Yeah.
Okay. Did y'all take any pictures of that moment or no?
There's certainly pictures of her bald in the straw hat on the wedding day. Yes, there is evidence of that.
Okay.
Luckily, we still speak to each other.
Okay. Last question for you. As a former nanny, I wish all parents would blank. Fill in the blank.
Listen to their children.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Beth, for coming on the show.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me. I have a question for you. I asked this to all my candidates. What's your motto for life?
Oh, it's easy. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. It's a quote by somebody, I can't remember who it was, but I remember reading that one time. And whenever I'm trying to decide something or make a decision or contemplating something, I always think back to that quote because I don't want to not do something and regret it later on in life.
Very true. I'm very motivated by our finite time. I think that's a great quote. Thank you.
For everybody listening, I'm going to include Beth's LinkedIn URL in the show notes, as well as link to her website. And this show isn't free. So if you enjoyed it, please hit that subscribe button. That's how you can pay for it and tell others about it. Until next week, this is Eric signing off, and I'll be back next week with another exciting European founder or marketer. Cheers, everyone.